Sharon O'Neill reporting. And still on water, the Baird government is now trying to amend the WICA law, that's the Water Industry Competition Act, which since 2006 has permitted the licensing of private water harvesting and recycling. It was introduced by the former Labor government at the height of one of this state's most vicious droughts to kickstart water schemes to take pressure off depleted potable or drinking water. Now the coalition government says reform is needed to level the playing field for private operators seeking to compete with the state-owned water utilities. But a parliamentary fight's broken out over the reforms. 2006, New South Wales was as dry can be. There was fear that Warragamba Dam and other vital catchments would never recover from one of this state's most destructive droughts. Peter Primrose, now opposition water spokesman, says the drought was the motivation behind WICA, the then Labor government's Industry Competition Act.
One of the objects of the 2006 WICA legislation was to enable private water companies to invest in water, provided they found new sources of water to put into the system.
The Greens opposed WICA, saying it would allow privatisation of water, but Labor got it through Parliament with a significant condition, Section 10(4)(d). Private water supply licences may not be granted unless that water will have been obtained otherwise than from a public water utility, which means find your own water, like this major stormwater harvesting and recycling site in inner Sydney.
There's about 10 up and operating at the moment, and all up there are around 30 licences. But really, the program's only been going since 2008. Private water companies apply for a licence. They then go out and have to find sufficient quantities of water. For another example, other than Central Park, is, for instance, out at Rose Hill. Rose Hill water recycling plant. It recycles currently about 3 billion litres of water a year, and that will go up in the next couple of years to about 7 billion litres of water that's supplied to industry. Now that's water that then doesn't come out of our drinking water supply. It further helps drought-proof Sydney.
Private corporations licensed by IPART, the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, would have to find sites where they could harvest and recycle new sources of water separate from public supply.
We take wastewater from within the community, rainwater, stormwater, and we turn that into recycled water, and we recycle that through the green walls that you can see and the cooling towers that we have here, and that saves drinking water. So we save 1 million litres a day here.
Terry Leckie is Managing Director of Flow Systems, which is licensed under WICA to harvest and recycle stormwater and sewage at Central Park, the state-of-the-art, environmentally sustainable commercial and residential precinct on the old CUB brewery site in Sydney.
So this is a recycled water centre in the basement of the building, and it takes multiple water sources from the building and from the precinct that is around the building, and it produces 2 qualities of water that are delivered back into the building and then over to the tri-generation thermal plant. This water in the building is used for clothes washing and toilet flushing, and for irrigation of the green walls.
And you're drought-proof?
And we're drought-proof, yes, correct. And we're saving water for Sydney.
Now, through the Water Industry Competition Amendment Review Bill 2014, the Baird government and Water Minister Kevin Humphries are seeking to remove Section 10(4)(d), provoking an inter-party parliamentary dispute.
If Mike Baird's amendment to the WICA legislation goes through, this will lead to privatisation of water by stealth. The water licensees, the private water companies, can simply be resellers. There is no obligation on them, if this legislation's passed, to find new sources of water.
Minister Humphries was unavailable for an interview, but in an email exchange rejected Peter Primrose's objections.
Peter Primrose is simply wrong to suggest licensees can become water resellers. In fact, the bill explicitly provides that this cannot occur. There must be investment in new infrastructure, consistent with the original policy intent of encouraging new investment in water infrastructure.
About the Peter Primrose says Labor will oppose the amendment in the upper house. So will the Greens, but with this recrimination.
This is Labor's legislation. It's being tweaked by the Baird government, and it's a bad tweak and one we will vote against, but it is still the basic architecture of Labor's competitive legislation.
With the Independent Commission Against Corruption this year exposing allegations of corruption involving the private entity Australian Water Holdings, is there a corruption risk through the latest Wicker amendments? But shouldn't there be a competitive regime here?
Competition might work in the case of the sale of tomatoes, but where we're talking about a natural monopoly, you can't choose who lays the pipes in your streets. You can't even choose which retailer you get. The competition happens at the developer level, not at the level of the individual consumer. This is nothing about protecting households, which is what competition is supposed to do, and everything about fattening up the profits of the big corporations.
The Minister rejects this.
These reforms are not designed to facilitate privatisation. The New South Wales government is encouraging competition, driving innovation and boosting efficiency across the state's water sector.
Stay tuned. The Wicker Amendment is expected to be debated in the upper house later this month.